Can I get a yeehaw?
So if you are a long-term subscriber to my channel, you know I have made a few videos on Jordan Peterson, but I've mainly focused on his stance on women's rights and all this stuff about, enforced monogamy and his sexist view of a lot of women, and obviously I have many problems with that. But today I want to really get into the whole cultural Marxism stuff and how it is really just fascist propaganda, and how Peterson himself, by pushing this cultural Marxism, is just pushing Nazi propaganda and has helped it come back into the mainstream. Now, do I believe that Jordan Peterson is a Nazi? No, I don't, but his rabid anti-leftism has made him really susceptible to fascist arguments, and I'm going to get into how cultural Marxism has its roots post-Russian Revolution with fascists and then later the Nazis. So I remember when Jordan Peterson first came on the scene, I remember his first interview with Dave Rubin, I think it was like a Skype interview, and I remember he sort of broke down into tears when he was talking about this stuff, saying about how his house is covered with Soviet propaganda to remind him that he never wants this to happen again. He never wants the left or the Marxists to get in power, because they will bring us gulags, they will bring us authoritarianism, because that is how they get their utopia. Because that is what Marxism inherently leads to. In the pursuit of utopia, it always becomes authoritarian dictatorships. So his paranoia about Marxists and leftists, to me, is completely insane, and he has gone to rehab lately, but I think it's more to deal with his addictions and how it's affecting his mental health, and I doubt it really plays into it. I'd hope it does, but at the end of the day, I'm not going to give him too much of the benefit of the doubt in this instance, because it's been part of his whole shtick for ages, just hating on the left and pushing this Nazi propaganda. And for an intellectual, his arguments are really unconvincing. For example, he says the reason the Nazis and the Soviets had these authoritarian regimes and killed so many people is because they didn't believe in God, and they didn't have a fear of God, and they didn't have a fear of the repercussions of sinning and everything, so they didn't have proper morality, so they did these awful things, right? And I remember on Reddit someone said to him, 99% of Germany when the Nazis were in power was Christian. Are you seriously saying that the Nazis were atheists? And then he just replied, the Nazis were atheists, and it got downvoted to oblivion, because of course the Nazis weren't mostly atheists. Even if there were some atheists among them, they were obviously mostly Christian, and they used Christianity to help get Germany on board with the Holocaust. So Jordan Peterson seems to really not understand authoritarianism. He just thinks that lack of God and Marxism and Nazism equals authoritarianism, which I don't completely buy. But talking about all this Nazi stuff, let's talk about cultural Marxism's links to the Nazis. So it starts with cultural Bolshevism. So in the wake of the 1917 Russian Revolution, conspiracy started flying around that it was orchestrated by the Jews, and it was a part of a worldwide Jewish conspiracy to take power in Europe. But it also expanded outside of Europe, and part of the conspiracy was that the Jews were behind all communist movements in the world. They just wanted to use these movements to take power for themselves. Now, this was brought into the mainstream when in 1919 the book was published, The Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Now, this book was in part funded by Henry Ford, obviously a massive Nazi sympathizer, and he made sure this book was brought over to the US and widely circulated. It also became a key textbook for children being educated in Nazi Germany. So in Russia before the revolution, a lot of Jewish people did support more socially progressive policies because the Tsarist regime was so awful to the Jews, and obviously throughout the history had done numerous pogroms against the Jews. So when the whites fled to the west, they fled to Germany, they fled to England, because there were some Jewish members of the Bolsheviks, they said it must be the Jews who have orchestrated this whole thing. And another reason the Jewish conspiracy became so normalised was because white royals and white aristocrats went around Europe saying, look at all the Jews who ran the Bolsheviks, look what they've done to the country, it's obviously a Jewish conspiracy, and plays into historic anti-Semitism that European Christians have had against Jews pretty much since the Romans adopted Christianity. So this is how anti-Semitism became a key part of anti-leftism. Hitler would say in the 1920s that a main part of the Nazis' ideology was to destroy Jewish Bolshevism, and most people who were anti-left were anti-Semitic because it got so muddied by these conspiracy theories. So in a lot of Nazis and just general conservative views at the time after the Russian Revolution, they believed any people pushing for progressive social change are part of this Jewish conspiracy. They are obviously controlled by the international cabal of Jews, wherever they may be, and we got to fight it no matter what. And that's why a lot of people became so anti-Semitic in this time. So this is cultural Bolshevism. It is similar to cultural Marxism, but it's not exactly the same. Cultural Marxism has its origins in the 1930s and is a bit different. But cultural Marxism is still wildly anti-Semitic. It basically believed that in the 1930s, the Jewish Marxist philosophers of the Frankfurt School, by pushing their views for progressive change in terms of sexual liberalization or accepting different races, they were actually trying to destroy American values. And it linked into what people thought about cultural Bolshevism. It's that the Jews are everywhere trying to destroy Western society. So people on the far right like William Lind and Holocaust denier Kevin MacDonald basically say that cultural Marxism is the root of all political correctness. That the historical efforts by academics and activists to push progressive policies and advance social change is actually part of a Jewish conspiracy aimed at destroying the West. Now, if any of you are familiar with Jordan Peterson, does this sound familiar? Because it does sound very familiar to me in his worldview and what he sees as the problem in Western academia. So it's pretty obvious that Peterson subscribes to a very similar ideology to these men and to people who generally believe in cultural Bolshevism and cultural Marxism. Remember how he became famous is because he refused to use people's preferred gender pronouns. Now, Peterson thinks that because the Marxists lost the Cold War, they have infiltrated academia throughout the world in an effort to push all these things like trans rights, like gay rights, push political correctness, and the logical extent of that is that one day there will be gulags for people like Peterson and for people who don't use proper gender pronouns. He sees it as a Marxist attempt to gain control over the world through pushing social change. Now, the only thing missing from Jordan Peterson's ideology is that he is not saying that the Jews are doing this, he's saying it's the Marxists, but we get into some shady territory because often when you believe things like cultural Marxism, Jews become synonymous with Marxists. Now I'm going to read a little bit from an article that talks about Jordan Peterson sharing a Daily Caller article on cultural Marxism and what he says in his own cultural Marxism video. So on Facebook, Peterson shared an article called "Cultural Marxism is Destroying America" from the racist far-right publication The Daily Caller. And these are my notes on the article rather than the article itself. The article itself is racist, saying that an American city is being torn apart by black rioters, and the article goes on to blame the racial tensions in the US on the vilified Frankfurt School of Philosophers. So let's remember who the Frankfurt School of Philosophers are. They are Jewish Marxists in the 1930s trying to push social change, and a lot of people have said it's part of the Jewish conspiracy to undermine the West and to really take over. Jordan Peterson is sharing articles that say the Frankfurt School are behind all these social changes in America. They're essentially saying it is the Jews doing this, it's just dog whistle racism, which I know a lot of people on the right can't actually understand. They think you have to be explicitly racist, and even when someone like Donald Trump is explicitly racist, apparently it's not racist. But I digress, let's go on to the rest of the article. In his cultural Marxism video, he says, "The Ontario Institute for Studies of Education, that bloody thing is a fifth column. The people who are producing the educators who emerge from that institute, they should be put on trial for treason." He goes on to claim that these educators are targeting kindergarteners to infuse them with these radical postmodern Marxist ideologies. There's a grand conspiracy to indoctrinate good, righteous Canadians in their cribs. Those Marxists are sneaky, and when you're channeling fascist propaganda about sneaky Marxists, you're also targeting Jews, even when, as with Peterson, that isn't what you intend to be doing. In his cultural Marxism video, Peterson argues that whether you're talking about Leninist insurrection or folks criticising sexism or racism in cultural products, the end result is much the same. And the article makes a great point. It says that's dangerous nonsense, which can easily be used to justify any extreme violence. If your gender studies professor is the equivalent of Lenin, well, we better destroy her, right? Peterson's rabid anti-leftism makes him an easy mark for fascist propaganda. Right-wing anti-Semites in Hitler's day spun elaborate conspiracy theories linking Jews and leftists, and supposedly centrist politicians who hated and feared communism believed them. Today, right-wing anti-Semites spin elaborate conspiracy theories linking Jews and leftists, and Peterson, gazing at the Soviet-era art on his walls, believes them. So you see the language Peterson likes to use. He says traitors, and you know his stance on people pushing for social change. He is a conservative by all definitions. So like the article says, and like I was saying, Jordan Peterson is so anti-left, he is normalising and spreading fascist propaganda. Now, Jordan Peterson, who's so scared of gulags and he's so troubled by the Holocaust, why are you spreading fascist propaganda? I would say you spreading and normalising fascist propaganda is more likely to lead to authoritarianism than me advocating for trans rights and gender pronouns. Wouldn't you say that's the case? I would say that's the case. Now, we've seen this movie before. What often happens when you start normalising fascist propaganda? Well, the fascists actually get into power. If you start linking the Jews and the leftists all together, well, the right will just use it as an excuse to crush both of them, just like Hitler did. Now, for someone who's such an anti-Nazi, you seem to be blinded by your anti-Marxism because you are normalising old school fascist propaganda. And I've always thought Jordan Peterson was pretty insane for his fear of Marxism, but now I'm outlining here how he is dangerous. And for a guy who is so troubled by the Holocaust, he has no problem peddling anti-Semitism as part of his intellectualism. He probably should have stayed to self-help books, because I feel this is way more dangerous than anyone taking social change too far and being politically correct, literally spreading the right's Nazi propaganda. So to sum up, cultural Marxism and cultural Bolshevism are the foundations for Jordan Peterson's own cultural Marxism. It's deeply anti-Semitic. It basically paints every activist and philosopher who advocates for social change being part of a Jewish conspiracy that dates back to the Russian Revolution. It was something that was widely publicised by people like Henry Ford. It was even part of textbooks Nazi children were forced to read. And that is the stuff you are pushing out to your millions of followers and your thousands of Patreon funders. You're just giving them repackaged Nazi propaganda. And I know lots of libertarians, conservatives, and even liberals like to get all funny when you say things like this, but how else do you explain cultural Marxism? How else do you explain its history? And how else do you explain literally the way he frames it? The only thing missing from what he says is that he isn't saying the Jews are behind it, but like the article says, like I'm saying, when you're so fervently anti-Marxist, you don't need to say the Jews are behind it, because the actual Nazis will take your arguments and just say, let's take it one step further. It's not just the Marxists infiltrating the universities, it's the Marxists and the Jews, or the Jews are directing the Marxists. You know that's what they will do. And it is so dangerous how he's normalising this. And people say Jordan Peterson is sort of the cure to the alt-right. I'd say he's part of the pipeline to the alt-right. And I've said this about Ben Shapiro as well. Because if you're peddling fascist propaganda, I don't understand how you're an antidote to anything. You're way more dangerous than what you're claiming to fight. Anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Please like the video and subscribe. And maybe share if you feel there is anyone you know in your life that should maybe watch this. If you want to follow me on social media, follow me at The Tabernacle on both Twitter and Instagram. I also have a Patreon, and that is just in the description. And I thank everyone who is a patron. I also have a WordPress blog, and that is just in the description. I try and live stream every single Sunday, and you know, I've had a lot of fun lately with loads of new people. It's always a good laugh. So if you're about on a Sunday evening, please come and join us. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching.